All right, welcome back to a next episode of Building Software Better. We have an amazing guest today. All of our guests are amazing, so I guess I say that pretty redundantly. But in this case, we've got someone who's going to talk a lot about empathy, which we all need more of. But more specifically, we're going to talk a little bit about empathy and more of the software engineering space. So, Slim, I'm not even going to begin to pronounce your name. I know you go by Slim, so that makes it easier for us Western fools. But why don't you give us your full name? Obviously, we know Slim is your nickname, and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Well, so once again, no issues with calling me Slim. That's been my go-to name since college. That was my user ID. And the reason why my name is Slim is because my real name is Seung Chan Lim, but you can notice that my last name is Lim, and the first letter of my first name is S. So you put S and Lim together, and you get a user ID that says Slim. So everybody just kept calling me that since college. So for the past 25 years or so, that's been my name.
That's awesome. Now, you've been out of college for 25 years. Are you kidding us, or is this one of those empathy jokes? Or you
No, I
don't look
have.
like you've been out of college for 25 years. It's more like 2.5 years. But clearly, you've got all this
That's very nice
experience.
of you to
So
say.
I guess it's you've got the good genes.
I think Asians in general have like look younger deceptively so. But I am in
Uh,
my mid 40s at the moment.
Okay, we won't hold that against you. That's okay. That means you've got a lot of wisdom that you're going to share with us, and I'm excited to hear a lot about it. So, tell us a little bit about how you got started, just a bit about your background. We'll jump into kind of your story and sort of a little bit about your book and some stuff we want to hear about. But tell us just frankly, how did you get started? How did Slim jump into this world and sort of survive and thrive and become what he is today?
Well, so I'll just put some dots in a row, and then we can get into some of the details as you wish. So I was originally trained as a computer scientist in college, right? And I'll be very frank, it was a massive struggle. I wasn't like a one of those high school geniuses in math and computer science who just like excelled every. It was just a giant 4 years of slug and just struggle. But I had a very lucky break in my senior year where I met a professor by the name of Randy Pausch, who wrote the book called The Last Lecture. And he was my professor who opened my eyes to ask, why is computer science valuable? Right? Which is not a question that I've ever asked, especially not when I was like 19 or 20. But basically his reason was he believed that computers were a means to another end, and that end was to share experiences with people. And that came from his experience at Walt Disney Imagineering, which is where he used to work. So from his perspective, he was the computer scientist, but he wasn't the only type of person working on projects. There were artists, there were storytellers, there were other people from all walks of life working together. So that was sort of his why. And actually, even without thinking of my own why, even hearing that resonated very deeply because all the other professors seem to think computer science is an end of itself. And if anybody's uninterested in computers, you're somehow inferior. At least that's the vibe I got. So that was a big major break for me in the sense that after I graduated from college, from then on, I sort of continuously thought of computers as a medium and as a means to some other end, and that end entailed people sharing experiences together. So that's been kind of the beginning of my journey, if you will. But then along the way, another second dot that happened was I left the world that I was in, and then I went to an art school to do some kind of ethnographic research into what artists go through as they're trying to create something new. Right? And one of the things that happened during that time was I started to exhibit symptoms of depression, anxiety, and PTSD, which were sort of jarring because, like, from my perspective, art was supposed to be fun, right? It's just kind of free and do whatever the hell you want kind of a thing. But that is actually what happened. And one of the reasons why that happened was when you make art, the work feels like it's you, right? There is this sort of what I've come to call hyper empathizing that happens between the thing that you make and your sense of self and self-worth and identity, right? And so when people were criticizing the thing that I was making, my art, which was part and parcel of the artist's sort of educational pedagogy is you make something and you get criticized, you make something, you get criticized, and you're supposed to get good at it. The only thing is if you get criticized 3 times a day by 6 or more people for 4 years in a row, now that starts to take a toll on you. And so that's the time when I started to recognize that there is a sense of deep isolation and this sense of like not feeling sufficiently appreciated, understood, heard, basically to be empathized with. That just goes out the window in a lot of journeys that people go through when they're genuinely trying to make something that they don't know how to make yet because they've not done it, right? And that sort of shifted my understanding of empathy from sort of like the kind of empathy that I would give to other people, in the sense of like I want to be empathetic to people who I'm designing software for, to me like desperately needing to feel empathized with, right? And so two sides of the coin, so to speak, merged together, and the second part became a major awakening for me. And that has been my focus, because one of the things that came out of that was I wrote my book called Realizing Empathy, an inquiry into the meaning of making. And the folks that resonated most deeply with the content were startup founders, CEOs, right? Because they resonated in the sense that even though they were not artists in the proper sense of that word, they were going through a journey when they were genuinely trying to make something they've never made before. And they felt exactly the same experiences that I went through. So since then, I've been focusing mostly on coaching startup CEOs in their own journey of innovation.
Yeah, it's difficult. I mean, as a multiple startup founder, it's my fourth or fifth venture-backed startup over a few decades now. Yeah, it's like you said, it's like you don't know what you're doing, you don't know what you don't know, and so it's a bit of a struggle because you've got all these people that have trusted in you, either investors who've given you money, employees, obviously you're trying to give jobs and take care of them, sort of all this stuff, and it's stressful because on top of that you're trying to build for end users which you don't necessarily understand, and maybe you're even trying to build something brand new that nobody really understands yet, right? I mean, and it's just constant letdown. I feel it a lot myself. It's like I don't want to let myself down, but I'm much more worried about letting everyone else down.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm okay with myself. I mean, you're not okay. You're not okay with yourself. Right? I mean,
let's be honest.
But like for me at least, the higher order worry is I'm gonna disappoint my investors who's giving me all this money. I'm gonna disappoint my employees who I employ, and I might have to lay off if it doesn't work out. And I've done that, and that's terrible every time. It's awful. And so, and I'm going to disappoint the customers or the potential end users who buy the product if it doesn't work, because then they're going to have to find something else or lose money and so those things become way bigger to me than myself, not self-sacrificing. I'm not saying that. I'm just simply saying I'm much more worried about those things than I am, because I'll just go start another business or have another idea or whatever, and I feel like these other things are irreparable sometimes.
Right. And I think that's part of the journey, right? I mean, I think when we think about, starting up a company, I think most people imagine things like, oh, how do we make money? How do we, raise money, make money? All those are sort of the more tactical side of things. And the phrase we put on it is like the actual things that would help me. Like, I mean, as if that's the only thing that matters. When I think in the vast majority of cases, the people that I help, what they sort of start to realize is some of the more practical and tactical things you can just learn, you can get advice and just rummage through. But the human side of things, no matter how many times you start up a company, it's still there. It just doesn't go away. There's something both beautiful and challenging that exists in that intersection. So that's something that I think it's not always something that's fully and sufficiently appreciated, but I think it deserves to be.
Well, it's very true. I mean, just again, my own journey, there's a lot of things that get easier about, kind of technology and running a business and raising money. All this sort of become, you sort of learn those habits or learn those skills, depending on what those are. But to your point, the human side, well, you get a little bit better at how you manage people and how you sort of handle sort of stress and things like that. It's always difficult. It's never easy. I don't think you're human if it ever gets easy.
No,
I always tell people,
no.
like, if you lay someone off and it becomes routine and easy, and and you've done it enough times that it's no, you're not human anymore. You've sort of lost all hope.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's not a coincidence. I've seen people who on like two extremes, in the sense that, like, I've coached people who are now, whose startup has now gone bankrupt, and that now they're in debt, right? And I've also coached people who've exited with lots of money. So first of all, clearly I'm not any guarantee of success by all means, but more importantly, the thing that's common that I think that happens is both of them end up really in a deep reflective state of asking themselves, who am I? What do I really want out of life? And it's a similar kind of question that I think we're confronted when we're nearing death, right? So I think on one dimension, I think it sort of speaks to the gravitas of what this experience is like when you go through it. And in some ways, I think it's also an indication that there's something about this journey that goes way beyond business and all the more practical and tactical things. And it really forces you to ask the most essential questions that human beings sometimes are challenged to ask. And in many ways, I think 6 or 5 year olds, when we're a little child, maybe we'd have asked those questions. But along the way, some people say, like, oh, those frivolous questions you're asking, only those questions philosophers would ask because they have nothing better to do. But for whatever reason, this journey provokes you to ask those questions. And I think, once again, that's not a coincidence either.
Yeah, and in my own experience, to your point, I mean, I've sort of been, multiple companies, sort of see good and bad and success and failure, and I've sort of had my share of failure and I had a little bit of success. And to your point, like, even in the success side, when people are okay and happy and made money and whatever, you still feel unfulfilled. I could have done more. You should have made more money. All sort of, I wish I didn't have to sell the company, or whatever sort of those sort of and there are a wide range of emotions. And I don't know. I didn't make $100 billion, so I don't know. I don't know. There's those people out there that sort of are on that spectrum, but I have to believe they're probably sort of still dealing with the same thing. Like, what is my life for, and like, what do I do now, and so I think to your point, I think it's on sort of both ends of the spectrum. It's not just failure, and it's not just success. I always sort of say success brings its own set of problems and challenges and sort of self-image issues and all those things equally, if not even more. I mean, I think it seems like even more pressure. It was funny, like, I started getting calls from people, who'd never talked to me. Family members had never sort of bothered, all of a sudden, right? And sort of all these sort of weird things that sort of happen that you're never used to, and you're certainly not prepared for. And that's also equally guilt. Like, should I be doing more things? And should I, and it's sort of like this weird dichotomy of, like, you feel good, but you really feel terrible and guilty that with what you have. And it's hard to enjoy things, right? It's easy on it's not easy, but it's different on the failure side, because then sort of everybody knows you're a failure, and that's got its own set of challenges. Don't get me wrong, right? I mean, you feel the self-worth and, disappointing all these people. But I would say on the other side, it's equally difficult. It's a different difficult. I'm not going to sort of say it's the same, but equally difficult.
Yeah, and I think this is the kind of thing that I think most people are either not used to, or it's just genuinely difficult to talk about, and it's the in between, right? So I think, at least from my perspective, when I was doing computer science, I was trained mostly to problem solve. That was my thing, right? And I excelled at it, and that's something that to this day I'm proud of the fact that I'm a kind of a natural problem solver. At the same time, that's not the whole of the story, right? Like, I think human life is not merely about problem solving. There is something else, right? And one way in which, for me to sort of grasp with this sort of amorphous, the other part, is thinking about the difference between thinking about either or versus both or neither, right? So, for example, the either or is like, there's a good and bad. So, like, problem bad, solution good. or any other way to think about like that. For example, in your case, like success good, failure bad. Like there's a plethora of ways in which we live our lives or sort of think about or make sense of things in an either or kind of fashion.
Right.
Then there is neither and both, which is the more ambiguous, uncertain, and hard to sort of talk about without really discussing the nuance and subtlety of things, right? So, for example, when people go through success or failure, if you think about it as an either or, you concentrate on success or failure. But if you think about the both or neither, it's there's something in between that happens. There's a conflict between what you think should be versus the way they are, which is when you like the example that you give like when you've exited with tons of money, you feel like you should be happy. Like you should not have any complaints whatsoever. You should be ecstatic and happy all the time. There should be no more problems. Like I've made it. Like I've finally arrived at the point where all my problems go away. Just doesn't happen.
Right.
Like not only does it not happen, you have new problems that you never expected to happen,
right.
And you're completely unprepared for it. Because part of your mind says like, I shouldn't think of that as a problem. Oh my God, I'm like so much better off than so many other people. I should be grateful for everything. I should never feel this way. But once again, the in-between space, somehow the subjective experience is that is not the way it feels. And that in and of itself cannot be invalidated. But ourselves, and in some ways, as the harshest critic, we're constantly judging and criticizing ourselves for feeling any kind of unpleasant emotions when all external signals are kind of projecting outward, saying, "I'm successful, I have everything I need," etc., etc. So it's neither about success or failure, but about this conflict between what our mind dictates that the way we should be, way we should feel, or the kind of person we should be, and the very real visceral experience that we go through on a day-to-day basis, where that just doesn't jive with the way things are. And it was the same case for me when I was going through art school once again. And this was, just to be blunt, like it's sort of my making in the sense that I used to judge artists as self-indulgent, navel-gazing bullshitters, right?
And they're not? Oh, please educate us. I'm just kidding, but please educate us.
But once again, neither and both, right? It's not
Right.
an either or. So
I'm just kidding.
So, and the reason why that was because, first of all, I was trained as a computer scientist.
Right.
And once again, like problem solving, I'm like, what problem are they solving? They're wasting a bunch
clear
of
problem,
time.
Clear solution. Right.
Yeah, they're like as far as I'm concerned, like they're like wasting people's time. Like, what are they doing? Like gazing at a giant red block on a wall or something like that. But then, so the little transition I had in between was when Randy introduced me to the world of empathy and sharing experiences with people, I got also introduced to the world of design, right? So that even though design was different from computer sciences, that was an easier leap for me in the sense that it was about making things more pleasant for people. And specifically at that time, this was in the late 90s, it was all about usability, like making things easier for people to use, right? So that I was like, oh, okay, yeah, I guess not everybody wants to just type a bunch of commands on a command prompt and do things. They want to click their mouses around and find things visually. I can jive with that. So that wasn't a big jump for me. But from there to art was a big jump. I just couldn't wrap my head around why would anybody spend, like countless hours a day just painting red blobs and things like that on canvas and like struggle to make a living at the same time. That just didn't make any sense to me. So I just thought like, oh, there are people who just want to enjoy life without doing the hard work. As I'm saying this, I feel so naive and ignorant. It's sort of like making me cringe. But that's I'm just being genuinely honest. That's the way I thought of artists. Like these are people who just are very narcissistic. They just want to enjoy the pleasantries. They don't want to struggle. They don't want to have hardship. They just want to, if they want.
And that wouldn't be uncommon. I mean, to sort of stereotype, that wouldn't be super uncommon for people to think that way, right?
Yes,
so
exactly.
Reveal like what happened.
Well, so one of the things that I experienced when I went through art school is people who are, so first of all, there is this sense of there is something that they're intuitively feeling that they want to express. So that's a very small starting point. But the giant gap starts to happen is maybe they were young, or maybe they're, sort of in their late times, but they had something they genuinely felt they want to express, and they try to experience it one way, and they failed in the sense that people didn't get it, right? And there is this little feeling of feeling not understood, feeling like what you try to express doesn't matter. And once again, because there's this hyper empathizing between yourself and your work, when people don't get the work, you feel like they don't get you. So you don't feel understood, you don't feel appreciated, and you don't feel like you matter at all, right? And depending on what stage in life you're at, and how deeply desirable it is that you so want to make sure that you get this communicated to other people, the gravitas of that changes, right? So even if it starts off as a very small intuitive sense of like, oh, there's something here, I really want to express this to other people and communicate it, and I want people to also understand and appreciate this thing, it may start there, but it sooner or later starts to snowball, and the chasm just widens and widens and widens, right?
Yeah.
And if you sort of jump the time warp system, if you will, that builds in ways I think it's hard to fathom unless you actually go through it. And I think I don't want to say easy, I think the perfectly normal and natural and human ways of making progress and then journey is to build resentment. You can generate a lot of anger, a lot of resentment, and even hatred towards all the people who has not appreciated you as a human being, because that's the way it comes across, even though it might not seem so. And you can get really, really resentful. You can get really, really bitter. You can get really, really cynical. And one of the experiences I've had, which I've now come to understand as a symptom of PTSD, is hypervigilance. So this is where, because you feel so misunderstood and so underappreciated, and that you don't matter, when even people who have the best of intentions, they want to care for you, they want to be able to help you, they want to support you, they say things out of good intentions, but even that hurts. Because the thing that they say out of good intentions still doesn't mean they actually understood and appreciate and recognize the value that you bring to the world, right? So when this happens over time, over and over and over and over again, you develop this hypervigilance where you're constantly on the lookout for people that can potentially hurt you, right? And it becomes extremely difficult to trust people who are around you. And once again, to the people's credit, it's not that they necessarily, all of them have malicious intent, but that's the way it comes across. And before you know it, making art becomes a way of life. Like, that's the only way in which you can sustain life, because that's the unique channel you have as a way to outlet all the things that you're experiencing. It's like, first of all, you want to stay true to your beliefs that there is something of value here. I'm not going to let that go, because the moment I let that go, that also means that I myself crumbles. I'm gone, right? So I don't want to let that go. And at the same time, also, it's like when I'm experiencing resentment, anger, and all these other emotions of isolation, this is the only partner, if you will. My materials, like the paint I have or the canvas I have, are the only trustworthy, only reliable, and only predictable partner that I have, that I trust to the core of my heart that they are not going to betray me.
Yeah.
It's
funny when I hear you talk about all this. For me, it's very much a parallel. For me, it's a parallel to how I feel, and as a startup founder and creator maker, and certainly as an engineer, I don't think it's that too dissimilar. Because like when I always say, like, you kind of go to where you're most comfortable when you're most nervous. So I always like to say, like, for me, that comfort is the keyboard. I go to my terminal, and I start writing software, and I start fixing bugs, and I start trying to control things that I know I can control, and I'm comfortable with. And like you said, for me, it's order, because I know sort of, it's problem solution, and even if it's a hard problem with a hard solution, it's finite. It's not gonna, it's not forever, and I know it can problem solve, um, and that's where I retreat. And I think everybody
Yes.
has sort of a version of that they sort of do. And so I can imagine, I'm not an artist, but I can imagine as an artist, like you said, the canvas is that retreat, right? The paintbrush or the sort of their hands, if they're doing sculpting or whatever it might be, is sort of the way. And on the other side, that sort of the other thing you said, that reminds me a lot of myself and my own journey as a startup creator, founder, sort of inventor, is I have a real hard time often expressing what I see, like my vision, and where I sort of because I always, for like most, I think, founders and creators, you see like 3 or 4 steps ahead. It's like you see the masterpiece before what's on the canvas.
Yes,
To use sort of the art form, like
yes.
what's on the canvas, maybe a few brush strokes and,
Right,
sort of
right,
raw
right.
paint, but that's not what I see. Like I see
Yeah, right, exactly.
the fourth iteration of that, and I do the same with sort of like software or the sort of the business I'm trying to create. It's like I see like 5 iterations down the road. What everyone else sees is just sort of what's in front of the screen and sort of what they can click on, and sort of like, and it's really, and I'm pretty good at telling stories, but I mean, it's really difficult for me. Sometimes it takes like several iterations to kind of get other people to go, oh, I can now sort of roughly see like the second or third iteration. I'm still, on the 5th iteration. And that can be really difficult and really frustrating on both sides. Like for me, it's frustrating because
Yes.
I'm like, I'm
Yes.
trying to like explain this thing and don't you get it? And like, why can't I help you connect all these dots, And on the other side, it's like certain people have learned to work with me well, but it's like, man, it takes a lot of work because you're like, I got to sort of suspend reality and I got to sort of blink and squint and like really try hard to understand what Jeff's talking about.
No, I mean, yeah, exactly. I mean, so I think there's sort of two thoughts. On the one hand, the difficulty of this is invisible from the outside, right? And this is the reason why I looked at artists and I thought like they're just enjoying life. They're having the time of their life. They're just splashing paint all over the place and just doing whatever the hell they want. And once I actually experienced what it was like to be an artist, that went out the window. And now I have a whole new appreciation and understanding of what the actual creative process is, right? So there's that on the one hand. I think on the other hand, there's also the notion of trivializing something that seems natural to ourselves, right? Mm. So, for example, the point you just earlier made about like why can't other people get what I see is like, so I used to think that I look at the world objectively. And once again, that may be because of my computer science training. Like, I was told I need to like repress my emotions, like emotions have no place in science. And, just in general, there's something about subjectivity that was just dirty and taboo. So I like try to get rid of it as much as possible. And so in my logical, maybe like, short logical sense, like I thought the training I had has allowed me to achieve this sort of pinnacle of rationality and objectivity, where now I finally see the world in an objective sense, and I'm no longer impacted by any kind of biases or subjectivity. But one of the hard lessons I learned in art, and on both on a practical and a very deep level, is, so for example, if you learn how to draw from observation, that's one of the sort of basic skills you learn in art, right? So even the title of the courses are usually called something like drawing from observation. And to me, observation is objectivity. Like it's like facts and all that kind of stuff. So I take the class, and it was like a 14 or maybe 16-week class. And on the first day of class, what happens is, the teacher comes in, and a bunch of us are standing in front of canvases with a charcoal and some utensils to draw, right? And basically, somebody comes in that we've never met before, and they get stripped naked. And this is how it works. It's like you're supposed to. You're supposed to draw.
Your stereotypes are sort of getting reinforced day one.
Right. So you're supposed to draw these nude figures, and the thing that really angered me is like first of all, I didn't know how to draw. I was never trained to draw. So my problem-solving brain kind of went to a place where I said, oh, okay, I guess The model's there. It's a little bit uncomfortable, but I guess the professor is about to give us instructions on how to solve the problem of drawing by giving us step-by-step, notes on exactly how to go about the drawing process. I'm like, that's what I expected. Like, where's the problem sheet? Like, where are the challenges? Well, so the class was like 4 hours long, and like there was mostly just like silence after she said, okay, start drawing. And then it was like silence for 4 freaking hours. There's no teaching whatsoever. And the immediate reaction I had was like, I am paying money for this class. What the hell is the instructor doing? Why am I doing all the work? Like all sorts of, thoughts are occurring to my mind. And so, eventually I raised my hand and it's like, well, Ms., maybe there's a misunderstanding here. Maybe these other, kids, because they're much younger than I am, because I'm going to school at a much older age, I guess. It's like, maybe these kids are, already genius drawers coming from high school. They've already been selected as, the art kid or something like that. I'm not that person. I have no idea how to draw. I'm a bit older. Maybe I look younger because I'm Asian. I don't know. But I need to be taught. So would you be willing to give me some instructions on how to draw? And she like looks at me puzzled and as if like I'm like speaking an alien language or something like that. And she says, what exactly is the problem? And I say like, well, look at my drawing. It looks like crap. I mean, that's the problem. I need to fix it. I need solutions. And she looks at the drawing, and I still don't forget the exact wordings of what she says. Like she looks at, and to her credit, she actually genuinely takes a pause and looks at my drawing as if to like remark on an amazing piece of artwork. And she takes a few seconds and she goes, oh, I see. Well, the issue here isn't that you don't have the instructions on the techniques. You're not actually looking at the model. And I'm like, it's uncomfortable staring at a naked person, but I am looking at, this person. I kid you not. I am like trying to do my best to stare at them. So it's like, yeah, I know what you mean. And there's no other way of explaining this, but to say that only you can learn how to look. And I'm like, what? Is this like an episode of Kung Fu? Like, am I the grasshopper?
Yeah. You're in a philosophical class.
Yes, some Zen koan thing going on. Like,
right.
And she's not even Asian. She's like a blonde white person. I'm like, what the hell is going on with this class? What have I signed myself up to? And then she just leaves, right? I mean, as if to say, like, I mean, I wish there's something I could do, but I really want you to practice looking at the model. And she just walks away. So I'm like, at this point, once again, I'm still like confused and angry, but the overachieving Asian side of me kicks in. And I'm like, okay, the game is on. So I'm just gonna like figure this out on my own and just like prove that like you're wrong. I'm gonna like learn the technique. I'm gonna start reading books about drawing, like all sorts of like the more sort of logical side of me kicks in and just like getting into high gear on how I'm gonna figure this drawing thing out the exact same way that I would expect for me to figure out, right? So fast forward 11 weeks. Same exact content for every single class. We walk in, she walks in, a model walks in, they get naked. She says, start drawing. We draw for 4 hours in silence, no teaching whatsoever for 11 freaking weeks, right?
Horrible.
So week after week after week after, like I'm reading books, I'm doing everything I can to like learn all the techniques. And on the 11th week, and I still don't know exactly whether it requires time or not, but I have this experience where I notice that, and I can do this still to this day, what I notice is when I look at the model, what immediately happens is in my mind, I draw an outline of what I'm looking at. And what I do then is I try to put on the canvas with charcoal the thing I see in my mind, not what's actually in front of me. And I start to realize, is this what she means by I'm not actually looking at the model, but then I'm thinking of what I'm looking at in front of me as opposed to actually looking. So there is a little bit of an opening that happened when I noticed that about myself, right? So then I say, okay, so if that's what she means, how can I really look at the model that's in front of me and not rely on the image or, what I've since come to call a kind of a prejudice or a bias I have in my mind about what I think I'm looking at. So then I'm like actively trying to like keep my eye on the model, and I try to move my hand in such a way that I pay less attention to what's in my mind and pay greater attention to what's directly in front of me. And I no longer try to draw the thing that I know, which is like, because in my mind, it's not just I'm drawing an outline, but I actually have like, there are words like, oh, that's an eye, that's a mouth. I have all these labels for things that I presume to know what they look like, right? So I say like, okay, I'm not gonna listen to those voices, and I'm gonna not even assume that I know what a lip looks like or an eye looks like or a nose looks like. I'm just gonna try and translate what's directly in front of me without any of those things, right? Not easy to do because it's a whole new way of looking and a whole new way of drawing that I'm trying to practice. And the funny things, and I'm not saying like overnight I became like the world's most amazing drawer or anything like that, but in a relatively short amount of time, like within that time period of that class when I made the awareness, I started to draw like what I've now come to realize as like shades, right? Like darknesses and lightnesses and various degrees of darkness on charcoal. And I'm just like splattering it all over the place because I'm trying to directly translate the spatial orientation of where these darknesses and lights and lie on the canvas. And in the beginning, it just looks like a bunch of charcoal marks all over the place. But if I spend like, 30 minutes on it and I just draw and draw and draw and draw, at some point, the person like starts to emerge out of the canvas, out of this blobs of shades, right? And now when I go to the museum, when I see all the different techniques that people have come up with on how to draw, like I can empathize, like, oh, so they're saying, what do I really see? Do I, like, for example, like the Picasso types of all the Cubist people, that person, like Picasso was saying, well, I see this side of the person today, but I spent several days painting. So the next day when I come back to paint, I actually see a different side. So screw, realistic painting. I'm just going to draw this side of the person. I'm going to draw that side of the person the next day. I'm going to draw that side. They're not trying to like just draw random shit. Like there's like a real deep inquiry that they're trying to go forward and explore. And the outcome may look weird to some people, but it's coming from a place where they're really trying to explore, what is it that I'm actually experiencing in this world, right? It just so happened in the very beginning, when all those more fancy forms of art come, they were still struggling with, how do I actually genuinely capture what I see in the sort of the more realistic kind of a sense. And when that happened, like literally my perspective changed, and I could now choose to look at the world in multiple different ways, right? And that realization for me was very, very, very profound.
That's awesome. That's a great story, and it's like you said, it sort of manifests for you. Coming from an engineering background, manifests itself as sort of more artistic form. But software is artistic, creating companies artistic. There's a lot of things that are fairly artistic, maybe not in the traditional sense that we might describe it as artists, but I think of myself more like an artist than a scientist. I mean, in maybe that traditional sense, more of a creator, a maker than sort of the alternative, I guess. So you have a book. You talk a lot about this. Let's just tell us as we wrap up here. Just tell us like, what's kind of one thing that, without sort of divulging state secrets and, people's private stuff, but like, what's kind of one, you coach a lot, you sort of help a lot of people. Like, what's one thing that you've sort of seen that you've sort of been able to help someone through that you can maybe tell us a little story about?
Okay. So which one is it about the book or my coaching experience?
book, coaching experience, whatever. Let's sort of tell us about one sort of real thing that's happened that's not yourself, but how you've helped someone else, and sort of through a travesty, through some improvement, whatever it would be. Just give us a little bit of a real life story here, without like I said, without divulging anything about anybody,
Yeah,
to protect the
so
innocent
without breaching
or
confidentiality.
the guilty.
Right. And maybe it's what I'll do is I'll sort of extract a bit of a pattern, and I'll try to dive in some of the specifics to give a breath and blood to the pattern. So something that I hear a lot is CEOs who wish their employees would perform better. Right. This is obviously front and center to a lot of people. Right. And I think there are multiple ways to approach that quote unquote problem, but a popular one is they want to grow them. And I don't know exactly where this metaphor comes from, maybe from gardening, who knows. But the idea of growing your employees is a very popular one, and it's something that a lot of people approach me with. And I have no qualms with the idea that a founder or CEO of a company can support their employees and help them grow and all that kind of stuff. But I think where the chasm or the conflict, the one we talked about before, often happens is when this idea, like very honestly, and this is to me like the key, right? So I often say, the process of receiving coaching, although we solve problems, at the heart of it is the process of becoming like deeply honest in the sense of not like I'm not lying honest, but honest in the sense of there's onions that we need to peel to get to the honesty, because we're unaware of our own honesty. It's not that we have malicious intent or that we're dishonest in the lying kind of sense. We just don't know. So because there's a lot of layers that we need to unpack, right? So in that sense, usually when people are approaching me with the idea of wanting to grow employees, when we explore a level deeper, that impetus often comes from expectations from the outside, right? For the two popular ones, one of them is, for example, a CEO I was coaching had this deep desire to grow employees, and in the beginning, because the passion was so big and large and unwielding, we kind of went with it and kind of spent a few months on the more obvious things of like, what are some areas in which you could support them, how to delegate, all that kind of stuff. But the thing that I noticed, and one of the things I asked them to do is like, I want you to do some kind of a journaling exercise almost every day. And it doesn't have to be lengthy. It doesn't have to be burdensome. It's whatever you believe is valuable for you to log on a daily basis, because you will eventually look back at it and find some glimpses of insight from it. And one of the things that we decided together was that he would log his energy level, right? And then, kind of write about a brief summary of, what was the thing that was draining his energy. And one of the patterns that we noticed was even when he was having some conflict with his co-founder, even when he was having some challenges with investors, his energy level would still be around 6, like it would drop to about a 6, right? But then when he was trying to help employees grow, his energy level will go to like a 2, or sometimes even a 1, right? Very, very, very low. And after a while, this became very clear that this was a pattern. So I sort of confronted him and said, like, all right, let's take a break. What's going on? So in the beginning, you came to me and said, like, this is the most important priority for you. Want to grow your employees and all that kind of stuff. But at the same time, as your coach, my priority is not the company. That's your priority. My priority is you, right? Because that's my priority. I'm a little worried. Because your energy level is way too low, and we need to be able to do something about it. Tell me what's going on. And the initial thing that he started to get honest about is he didn't want to do this.
So it was foisted on him from external.
Yeah. So and this was very
obligation. He felt like it was an obligation to live up to some expectation he had from someone else.
Many, like, first of all, like you look at, I won't name names, but you look at all the best-selling books around you on leadership. Right. It's all about, so first of all, just as a caveat, I value empathy greatly. Yeah, enough that I put my entire reputation and everything on that idea. That's that important to me. With that in mind, I am willing to go on record and say, like, this is not about sacrificing everything you have to take care of other people. That's not what this is about. It's, once again, it's about the in-between space. It's neither about being selfish. It's neither about being altruistic. It's about having this loop that connects people. And when it actually genuinely connects, it will be intrinsically reciprocal. You will actually receive energy and give energy, and it will sustain itself. That's the experience I had with empathy, and that's the experience I want to be able to provide, right? But in this case, the popular sort of realm was, first of all, he was an avid reader, a voracious reader, maybe it's a better word of saying. And all the leadership books have like the top 10 things you're supposed to do as a leader. And like, it's as if you don't do any one of these, you're somehow a failure in leader. You're not good enough of a leader, and you don't belong in any kind of circle where you can dare call yourself a leader. You just can't do it, right? How dare you call yourself a leader if you don't, do this. A lot of pressure on that end. A lot of pressure, right? And the second level of honesty he got to was his experience with his father, right? So he had a tumultuous relationship with his father. And the thing that his father wanted to bestow upon him was the idea of self-sufficiency. You have to stand alone. And once again, reminded of the fact that his father would have gone through wars where people died, and like people whom you trusted and relied upon were gone the next day, right? I mean, I don't know what that's like, but I can at least imagine that must have been pretty traumatic experiences to see people who leave you just like seemingly on a whim on a random Saturday evening or something like that, right? So he felt like self-sufficiency was such an important concept, because otherwise you just couldn't survive, right? So presumably that was an important value that he wanted to share with his son, right? And he did, and probably in a very forceful way of like constantly reminding himself, you got to be self-sufficient, you got to be self-sufficient, you have to be independent, et cetera, et cetera. And that was so fully, deeply ingrained in him. At the same time, he was also deeply ingrained of the idea of service. Like, you have to be good to people, you have to be kind for them. Now, here's the in-between space. Like, you're getting two conflicting messages. Right. One of them says you should serve other people. The other says you should be self-sufficient.
Right.
Wait.
Serve yourself.
Wait.
Yeah.
So other people should also be self-sufficient. Wait, am I the only person who should be self-sufficient? Right. But at the same time, careful. Like, I'm sure a child doesn't quite like see the conflict, but they just absorb this, on the surface level. But deep inside, there is this constant weird conflict of struggle, is like trying to reconcile the irreconcilable. Is like, I have to be self-sufficient, but I also have to care for other people. And in that space rises this pressure of like, oh my God, I'm noticing myself doing everything on my own. Oh, no, that is necessary. But if I do that, I notice that I'm not actually actively caring or serving other people. How do I actually solve this problem? And then now when a book comes along, book comes along and presents you with a problem, like, oh, what you do is you become a self-sufficient, strong, caring leader. And the way to do that is these 5 steps. Like, you do that, you kind of go through this lockstep process. And he's like, oh, I found the answer. I can finally reconcile this difference. And in the process of doing so, it becomes blind to him or her that this is not actively coming from a genuinely personal, motivated, inspired space. It's coming from both a place of pressure in terms of societal expectation, and also a place where there's sort of this double bind of a conflicting message that's been ingrained in him since childhood, that he wants to somehow resolve and feel some release from, right? And so the moment he tries to grow his or her employees, and the employee either doesn't immediately grow, which is not a very realistic expectation to have to begin with, right, there's some frustration. There's also a sense of deep betrayal when the person you've tried to grow for so many months all of a sudden quit and go to another company, right, or like you do something and then all of a sudden just because the person has done what you've told them to do, now demands like an exorbitant amount of salary increase that comes back. And like there's a countless number of hard to imagine, like, oh, nobody would do something like that. No, like if you think nobody could do something like that, people would surprise you and they would do it, right?
Right.
So when these things happen, there is this giant drop in energy. And in that instance, we really had to stop and say and get very, very honest and raw about what it is that you really genuinely want. And at the end of the day, growing employees was not what he wanted to do.
Right.
And becoming aware of this, admitting it, and becoming genuinely honest about it enough to say, okay, I'm enough. I don't have to grow my employees to become a valiant leader or a caring leader or a whatever adjective leader that you're supposed to be, the flavor of the year. I'm going to be who I am.
Right.
And I want to be able to be be serving in to the extent that that is a reciprocal thing that gives each of us energy and it sustains both of our lives. And in cases where I'm just completely draining energy, I'm going to find somebody who finds that energy giving to them,
Right.
and I'm going to completely delegate that off to that person, and that's okay. And because previously, delegating that part of yourself somehow made it seem like you're not good enough as a leader. But once we were able to overcome that part of it, other forms of transformation became significantly lighter to this person. Not easy, but lighter, because it was
Right.
in alignment with who this person was. And I think that's a very different way of looking at what it means to change, because we live in a society where we're always running around telling other people how you should change, how you should do this with the best of intentions. I'm not attacking the intention, the best of intentions, but it is not necessarily helpful. It's not actually what it means to support another person to the fullest extent. So I think there needs to be some balance that has to be struck with all the self-help books and all that kind of stuff. There is the need, I think, to return to the core of who we are as human beings, with all the human needs that we can have, and none of them is shameful. Like, for example, validation is a big thing that a lot of people feel ashamed about. Like, oh, if I have done this or done that or achieved this or made this much money, I shouldn't need any more validation. I shouldn't need any more appreciation. No, you're a human freaking being. And until the day you die, you will need validation. You will need appreciation. It's just oxygen, right? You may not need appreciation for every single human being on earth. That may not be the case, but you will still need validation and appreciation from the people that you genuinely crave that from. And,
Right.
and fostering and building and maintaining that relationship in any human being's life, I think, is critical. And if anything, and I want to leave today with is like, there has to be some inspiration, some motivation to fully become aware of and accept ourselves as the human being that we are, the both strong and fragile at the same time, the both vulnerable and impenetrable at the same time, the perfect and imperfect at the same time. None of the either or, and all the both and neither forms of human beingness. And if we are able to start the journey where we start to become fully aware of that and admit it to ourselves and others that this is the human being that we are, and from now that we are admitting and accepting this, we want to design a new way of living, new way of working, or new way of building software, whatever it is, with this as a design constraint, as opposed to something to brush under the rug or like feel ashamed about. If we can make at least a tiny step toward that way of being human and creating as humans, I think the world would be a very, very, very different place, even a decade from here on. And that's
Yeah,
my hope.
that's great. It's, basically let's make it let's make our differences and our sort of peculiarities and all the things that we have, let's make it a feature, not a bug, right? Let's make it
Right.
something that, it's part of who we are and part of how we design and create and make, not some, like you said, not some bug in the system. So,
Does
but
any of that resonate with you? I'm curious.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's been a wonderful talk, and it absolutely resonates. I'm sure it resonates with a lot of people. I mean, look, we all have these problems, like, and they're all different problems. They're all different, strengths that we all have collectively, and that's what makes life fun, and that's what makes life, for me at least, that's what makes things interesting. That's why I like being, involved in sort of this journey that I'm on, because every day is different. All the people I work with are different, and bring different things to the mix, and that's what makes life interesting. Not
Yeah.
always easy,
No, no,
but
no, no,
interesting.
not easy. Yes, yes.
Easy is actually not always the best.
Right.
Sometimes the hard. And when we look back, at least for me, when I look back, quote, the war stories you tell are just that. The sort of, we got into this thing, and we're trying to figure this thing out, and this bug was happening, and this customer was mad, and we did whatever, right? Or, it's all, those are the stories you tell. It's not like, yeah, everything was great, and we just sort of coasted along. Nobody tells those stories, right? I mean, it's always sort of the hard things that you sort of overcame, or sort of the interesting thing, that we all sort of did together as a team, that we sort of accomplished. That's the story I want to tell. That's the story we tell as humans, right? And that's what makes life interesting.
Yes,
So
yes,
with
yes.
that, it's been a
Absolutely.
wonderful time. I feel like we can talk for another 2 or 3 hours about this. We'll have to have you back on, and we'll continue this journey and continue this talk. Slim, it's been great. Hopefully, everyone out there will check out your book, and maybe there's enough people out there. Hopefully, it'll reach out to you and get some coaching. I've done a lot of coaching myself. I've coached other people, but and likewise, I've received over the years many different coaches that have helped me along the way, and so I definitely know the value of it. So if anybody out there needs a coach, even if they don't think they need one, I'd love for you to reach out to Slim, and I'm sure he can help you out. Certainly
Sounds
check out
great.
his book. All right,
Yeah. Thank you
Slim,
very
it's
much,
great
Jeff.
seeing you. We'll talk soon. Thank
Absolutely.
you.
Stay beautiful. Bye bye.
All right, you too.